Chapter 2. Further appearances of a cube to a plane being. Before leaving the observation of the cube, it is well to look at it for a moment as it would appear to a plane being, in whose world there was such a fact as attraction. To do this, let the cube rest on the table, so that its dark blue face is perpendicular in front of us. Now, let a sheet of paper be placed in contact with the dark blue square. Let up and sideways be the two dimensions of the plane being, and away the unknown direction. Let the line where the paper meets the table represent the surface of his earth. Then, there is to him, as all that he can apprehend of the cube, a dark blue square standing upright, and, when we look over the edge of the paper, and regard merely the part in contact with the paper, we see what the plane being would see. If the cube be turned round the up line, the brown line, the orange line will pass to the near side of the paper, and the section made by the cube and the paper will be an oblong. Such an oblong can be cut out, and when the cube is fitted into it, it can be seen that it is bounded by a brown line and a blue-green line opposite thereto, while the other boundaries are black and white lines. Next, if we take a section halfway between the black and white squares, we shall have a square cutting the plane of the aforesaid paper in a single line. With regard to this section, all we have to inquire is, what will take the place of this line as the cube turns? Obviously, the line will elongate. From a dark blue line it will change to a light buff line, the color of the inside of the section, and will terminate in a blue-green point instead of a French gray. Again, it is obvious that, if the cube turns round the orange line, it will give rise to a series of oblongs, stretching upwards. This turning can be continued till the cube is wholly on the near side of the paper, and only the orange line remains. And, when the cube has made half a revolution, the dark blue square will return into the plane. But it will run downwards instead of upwards as at first. Thereafter, if the cube turn further, a series of oblongs will appear, all running downwards from the orange line. Hence, if all the appearances produced by the revolution of the cube have to be shown, it must be supposed to be raised some distance above the plane being's earth, so that those appearances may be shown which occur when it is turned round the orange line downwards, as well as when it is turned upwards. The unknown direction comes into the plane either upwards or downwards, but there is no special connection between it and either of these directions. If it come in upwards, the brown line goes nearwards, or y. If it come in downwards, or z, the brown line goes away, or y. Let us consider more closely the directions which the plane being would have. Firstly, he would have up and down, that is, away from his earth and towards it on the plane of the paper, the surface of his earth being the line where the paper meets the table. Then, if he moved along the surface of his earth, there would only be a line for him to move in, the line running right and left. But, being the direction of his movement, he would say it ran forwards and backwards. Thus he would simply have the words up and down, forwards and backwards, and the expressions right and left would have no meaning for him. If he were to frame a notion of a world in higher dimensions, he must invent new words for distinctions not within his experience. To repeat the observations already made, let the cube be held in front of the observer, and suppose the dark blue square extended on every side so as to form a plane. Then let this plane be considered as independent of the dark blue square. Now, holding the brown line between finger and thumb, and touching its extremities, the gold and light blue points, turn the cube round the brown line. The dark blue square will leave the plane, the orange line will tend towards the y direction, and the blue line will finally come into the plane pointing in the plus x direction. If we move the cube so that the line which leaves the plane runs plus y, then the line which before ran plus y will come into the plane in the direction opposite to that of the line which has left the plane. The blue line, which runs in the unknown direction, can come into either of the two known directions of the plane. It can take the place of the orange line by turning the cube round the brown line, or the place of the brown line by turning it round the orange line. If the plane being made models to represent these two appearances of the cube, he would have identically the same line, the blue line, running in one of his known directions in the first model, and in the other of his known directions in the second. In studying the cube, he would find it best to turn it so that the line of unknown direction ran in that direction in the positive sense. In that case, it would come into the plane in the negative sense of the known directions. Starting with the cube in front of the observer, there are two ways in which the vermilion square can be brought into the imaginary plane, that is the extension of the dark blue square. If the cube turned round the brown line so that the orange line goes away, i.e. plus y, the vermilion square comes in on the left of the brown line. If it turn in the opposite direction, the vermilion square comes in on the right of the brown line. Thus, if we identify the plane being with the brown line, the vermilion square would appear either behind or before him. These two appearances of the vermilion square would seem identical, but they could not be made to coincide by any movement in the plane. The diagram shows the difference in them. It is obvious that no turn in the plane could put one in the place of the other, part for part. Thus the plane being apprehends the reversal of the unknown direction by the disposition of his figures. If a figure, which lay on one side of a line, changed into an identical figure on the other side of it, he could be sure that a line of the figure, which at first ran in the positive unknown direction, now ran in the negative unknown direction. We have dwelt at great length on the appearances which a cube would present to a plane being, and it will be found that all the points which would be likely to cause difficulty hereafter have been explained in this obvious case. There is, however, one other way, open to a plane being of studying a cube, to which we must attend. This is, by steady motion. Let the cube come into the imaginary plane, which is the extension of the dark blue square, i.e., let it touch the piece of paper which is standing vertical on the table. Then let it travel through this plane at right angles to it at the rate of an inch a minute. The plane being would first perceive a dark blue square, that is, he would see the colored lines bounding that square, and enclosed therein would be what he would call a dark blue solid. In the movement of the cube, however, this dark blue square would not last for more than a flash of time. The edges and points on the models are made very large, in reality they must be supposed very minute. This dark blue square would be succeeded by one of the color of the cube's interior, i.e., by a light buff square. But this color of the interior would not be visible to the plane being. He would go round the square on his plane, and would see the bounding lines, viz. vermilion, white, blue-green, black. And at the corners he would see deep yellow, bright blue, crimson, and blue points. These lines and points would really be those parts of the faces and lines of the cube, which were on the point of passing through his plane. Now, there would be one difference between the dark blue square and the light buff with their respective boundaries. The first only lasted for a flash, the second would last for a minute or all but a minute. Consider the vermilion square. It appears to the plane being as a line. The brown line also appears to him as a line. But there is a difference between them. The brown line only lasts for a flash, whereas the vermilion line lasts for a minute. Hence, in this mode of presentation, we may say that for a plane being a lasting line is the mode of apprehending a plane, and a lasting plane, which is a plane being solid, is the mode of apprehending our solids. In the same way, the blue line, as it passes through his plane, gives rise to a point. This point lasts for a minute, whereas the gold point only lasted for a flash.